Hello, and welcome to Frank's School. Well, the long process of watching or studying The Story of English by Robert MacNeil is now over. I'm going to call this today an afterword, talking about that whole experience briefly, and then to deal with now what in Frank's School. This is the 52nd day. I plan to have 180 days once again this fourth year. But what's going to happen next? But first of all, back to the story of English. That I kept saying, I had the feeling that was a long haul for many of you. And I watched the views. I didn't have that many people following me at the time. Now they may later, if teachers begin to decide, whoa, maybe I should put that into my course. But I don't know, at the high school level, in my mind, I'm teaching now 11th graders who had my course in 8th, 9th, and 10th year grades, and now this is the fourth year that they're taking my course, and basically homeschoolers, I suppose. But it wouldn't have to be. But I think I'm trying to produce English teachers. That's what I was. I was an English teacher. I was an English major graduate at Harvard, and I intended to become a teacher, and I did. English teachers. And I feel if you're going to be an English teacher, you really should know the subject of the English language, if that's what you're teaching, and not just the grammar, and not just the punctuation. I've dealt with those things already. But the language itself, English, and I don't like to think about how many English teachers there are out there who have never seen this series and are not able to look with the eye of a linguist at the language. So I'm doing that in this fourth year, and I'm not done. I think an English teacher also should know about the history of Britain, and that I may do a similar thing with a series called, I think it's called The History of Britain. For my own education as well, but so that's gone on. Now, there's also the personal quest, which I suggested I was going on. My own personal quest, this is very personal, to understand the loss of beauty. Why is it that I fail to see the beauty in what artists, whether they're musicians or painters or sculptors or writers or poets, in what they produced from about 1880 on. What happened? Well, to me, I'm not saying the art is bad. It's just, why is it that it's not beautiful to me? Well, anyway, in that quest, I've decided, well, artists, it's not really the fault or the doing of the artists exactly. Artists respond to the world they live in. And so I've looked at that world. What was that world like, starting somewhere around there? And these are things that I've come up with. The Victorian Empire was in full swing then with its centralization. I've also begun to develop my own, I'm sure it's not others have thought of it, but my own interpretation for the genuine horrors of the two world wars. I think of them as being part of this process. Germany had never had an empire. Spain, yes. France, yes. England, yes. But not Germany. And the world, well, I don't know. I'm not ready to go into that now. But in any case, in 1880, it's still at the beginnings of this. I mean, everyone acknowledges the horrors that came in the early 20th century. But leading up to it, the Victorian Empire was their centralization. That word, I am a decentralist. I have written the Decentralist Manifesto. I've put it in the course. The word standards, standardizations, or whether it applies to the English language or to bolts and nuts or machine parts, that is a culprit in my mind. What happened in metallurgy, steel especially, and iron, how that changed the world. And then fossil fuels, and that's widely acknowledged, what began to happen in the late 18th century with fossil fuels, although the inconsistencies are just unbelievable there. The same people that talk about sadly, about the use of fossil fuels, buy a multi-ton vehicle to drive down the road to get a hamburger. I mean, it's but anyway, that's their flush toilets. I mean, who can be against a flush toilet? Aha, I can't. Because with flush toilets, cities became possible. And you know, people look with horror at the idea that there was night soil before, and horses instead of the horseless carriage and their manure in the streets. No, there's another way of looking at that. Well, these things made cities possible. These three crops leap to mind: the potato, corn, and sugar. They were all pretty new at this time, and they had their impulse. These two came from the New World. Sugar, I'm just not as certain that it came from the New World, but they had a tremendous influence on population pressure. And the population pressure itself, I'm not willing to say it was simply that. It's the fact that they were brought into cities, and now you had so many people living close together in cities, away from their animals, that support them and the crops. I've run into the word modernism as something that I should maybe look into more. And now what I was just saying about the cities, I want to quote Farmers of 40 Centuries by a man named King. This is a book that was written back about that time. It was quite an old book. He went to visit China when China was being opened up. And I'm going to quote it as written in this book, Handmade by Langsner, just to give a little view of what I'm talking about here. Now here's the book, Handmade. A couple, Drew and Louise Langsner, wrote this in 1973, and in their introduction they quote, let's see, let me see where I should start. I guess just here's the quote from King. The replacement of the horse and ox by the internal combustion engine and the electric motor is, however, attended by one great disadvantage. The machines do not void urine and dung, and so contribute nothing to the maintenance of soil fertility. No one has yet succeeded in establishing an efficient and permanent system of agriculture without livestock. More precisely, for each unit of energy a Chinese wet rice farmer expends, he gets more than 50 in return. For each unit of fossil fuel we expend, we get 1/20th of a unit in return. On a basis of these ratios, Chinese wet rice culture is more than 1,000 times as efficient as our own system. Now, elsewhere in the course, I've talked about kilocalories as currency. That's not new to me. Here's what I was going to read up above here. In China, or perhaps more fantastic of all, were the traditional farmers of the Far East. In China, a 2 1/2 acre farm, that would be a little over a hectare, could support a family of 11, 2 cattle, 1 pig, and some chickens, besides bringing an income, just barely, adequate for buying provisions not raised or made at home. Now that may seem to have very little to do with the story of English, but there you can see, maybe you can better understand what's rolling in the back of my mind as I deal with this. I don't know. Anyway, now what? I've got 2 things to clean up. I call this the Batch Bug 300 series. Building a cheap but good various things on the farm here, the outside world here at Frank's School. I've got quite a few projects that I want to add on to, but I'm going to stop before Christmas. And then if I go on, it'll be the 400 series. This I began at the beginning of the summer. The prospectus for what I've become to I've come to think of it not as the Old and Other Ways Museum, but rather as the Handwerkershof, Handwerkershof, or the Handworkers Village that I'm building around here. So I'll go on and finish that. I did 2 parts already. And then we get into December, I'm going to go to Baroque music. You know, I've talked about things where the beauty has been lost for me. Well, the beauty has always been there for me with Baroque music. Now that's out of the 18th century, 1750s and so. And through the Advent season and the Christmas season, I want to deal with some Baroque music. Okay. All right, so I hope to see you soon. Bye now.